Runner in the house. That's awesome.
Mhm.
Money runners in the house. Any strength-based athletes here, or people that have strength-based goals? Maybe not. Maybe just me.
Yeah. You're alone on that one, Erik.
We'll maybe have a few minutes at the end and we'll talk about that because it ends up being important for everybody anyways.
Oh, 100%. And guys, if you don't feel comfortable talking over the microphone, you're more than welcome to drop questions or comments in the chat, and we'll get to those as we kind of work through this topic through the next hour.
Yeah. Maybe we should get going. Maybe you should start it off and introduce yourself, and we'll get going because we always run out of time for these bad boys. So
yeah. I'm Dr. Alexandra Smith. I'm a naturopathic doctor at Neurvana and Naturopathic Medicine, and my primary practice focuses women's health and hormones. And as a result, I work with a lot of training goals for women. And as an athlete myself, I'm quite passionate about this area and this topic in terms of maximizing performance and also just supporting the body for recovery and all that kind of stuff, and how we can prevent injury with nutrition, timing of eating, and what kind of training we're doing. Dr. Nelson, introduce yourself. Tell us about your training stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. So my name is Dr. Erik Nelson. I'm one of the fellow naturopathic doctors at Neurvana as well. So we do a lot of these calls and a lot of different topics. And I would say that this is one of the best topics we've ever got dealt to talk about, because it's certainly something that Dr. Smith and I are deeply passionate about. We think about a lot, we live it, we breathe it, and we love to talk to our patients about anything in the performance realm. So whether that's performing to just feel your best and be your best, or it's performing for a specific goal, or just walking that tightrope of maybe you have some health related goals and some performance related goals, and they might be competing during certain times of your life. And that's one of the most impactful and fun times as the practitioner, to step in and be a guide during those times when it is challenging. It's not quite as straightforward. When there is a trade-off at play, and you gotta know where to listen to your body and where to push. And that's part of what I do every day. So obviously my clinical role is mostly within the men's health and pain management. So I see a lot of athletes. I see a lot of people that are that have big goals, and big goals lead to really, really fun problems, and those fun problems lead to some interesting solutions. So hopefully we can get through a decent breadth of different topics today without going too thin on everything. I think that's something that often will come up during these talks, is we touch on so many little things, but I'd be happy to. That's kind of why I was asking about what kind of athletes are in the audience, or what kind of performance related goals that we have in the audience, because it can help us guide if this is a little bit more geared towards endurance or aerobic potential, or it has more to do with strength that can actually help us kind of stay on track. But maybe we could start, Alex, you can just chat about with performance. Performance obviously starts with the goal. So I would love to just hear your inputs on how you walk through with your patients, creating a goal, setting a goal, following through to, with intention.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first it's what motivates people, right? So as we kind of work with patients, both Dr. Nelson and I, we take 90 minutes with initial consults so that we can really understand what a patient is coming in with, what goals are there, what ailments they might be dealing with, and then what is realistic to put in place moving forward. But around that, I think more so it's starting to understand what the motivations are. So if someone is looking to build their endurance tolerance, or they have a goal of wanting to run, I'm in the running world, I run a lot, so I'm going to use running as an example, but if they want to run their first, 50K, let's say, how do we work with essentially intention around that goal so that we can build the tolerance of the body so that when you want to go run that 50K, you're able to do it, right? But in a very sustainable way. I think a lot of times we can have these big goals, but then we go too hard, too fast, and then that can lead to injury or can lead to burnout, and that like we just don't have the motivation to do these things anymore, right? So it's kind of figuring out that more sustainable way to set goals. And motivational interviewing is a technique that I think both Erik and I probably use in terms of developing what is it that motivates somebody so that they can achieve that in a really sustainable way. That's super general, right? It's becomes more targeted and specific depending on what the goal is. Do you have thoughts around that, Erik? Do you have other ways that you approach that?
Yeah, I love it. You have to, somebody's got to come in and want something, right? Usually they're wanting something generic, like, not generic necessarily, but everyone wants to feel good in terms of energy. They want to feel like they're capable, physically capable. I have a lot of people that are, I would say, in midlife, and they reminisce about their performance in their past, and they might be connected in some way to an identity where they used to be able to do something, and now they know that they can't. Or they are realistic with where they're at, and they know that the kids might be out of the house and they have time, they have a little bit of energy that's available to them, and they want to re-engage with something, and there might be something that's very exciting to them, but they don't know how to go from, this is really exciting, I know a couple colleagues that do it, but I really don't know how to assess where I'm at and how do I get to where I need to go. So I love it when my patients are a little bit more specific. But if you're just thinking, Char, you put in the comments there that building your strength as you get older and as maintaining strength ends up being a very common goal. But I just try to narrow it a little bit more to that. So is it balance? Is it your ability to pick up grandkids? Is it your ability to go hike when you go on when you dock your cruise ship, wherever you're going on vacation? People usually can turn, I want strength, or I want to, a certain body weight, or I want to have certain energy or endurance. And usually there's something really specific behind that. And that is way more motivating at the end of the day. It's like, I want to be able to keep up with my kids. I want to be able to keep up with my grandkids. I want to be able to water ski. I haven't been able to water ski in this amount of time. And that might just be, okay, what do we need for that? A lot of single leg balance, a lot of single leg strength. And it can really create the color behind the goal that leads to a very effective training program that allows you to kind of avoid the noise. Because as soon as you Google, you're going to find all sorts of people giving you all sorts of advice about what you should be doing. But what the best first step is to assess where you're at right now, and then just following one foot in front of the other. And if you hit an obstacle or you hit a plateau and you're not seeming to progress, then that's often when you need to go seek some more advice. It's not really about getting more and more and more information and then being more confused and less convinced that what you're doing is actually helping or working. Right. So goal setting for me, be as specific as you can, general at the beginning. Then by the time we leave the office, try to be very specific, and then we can easily create a plan from there.
Totally. Yeah. Would love to dive into like around training and a lot of this, like whether we have strength goals or we have endurance goals. Walk me through your process in terms of nutrition before and after workouts, timing of workouts for people. I feel like this is an area of big confusion in terms of when to time, and it's actually very different for men and women. It's a really important topic, I think, for us to cover, and I'd love to hit it early just so that we don't run out of time with this one. But maybe you start from male perspective, and then I can give kind of the female in terms of how we maybe shift that a little bit with nutrition and stuff. But yeah, take it away.
Okay, I love that. Before I dive into the peri-workout nutrition and all that good stuff, because this is an example where you can get a whole bunch of information. It's really good, it's really accurate, it's really useful, but then you get bogged down in the reality that the main point of all that additional ancillary information is to support your ability to train, your ability to recover, and to adapt to the stimulus, right? So really, really important is that people understand that the primary performance-based metrics that you were going after require training. And that training is some sort of a physical stimulus in the form of exercise. and that's going to give you a adaptation over time, assuming that you do the things that we're about to talk about, which is, set yourself up for an ability to recover, right? But if you're not doing the work, if you're never running, then good luck going to do that half marathon for the first time, right? If you never actually trained by running, you could be doing all the right nutritional approaches, sleeping really well, mindset is dialed in, but then you've never actually done the training. So by the time you hit 12K, you're feeling the fatigue in your legs and you just don't think you can continue, right? So at the end of the day, I really want to remind patients that, and everybody here, that the most important part is the training. And then if you can do anything at all to optimize your ability to do the training, recover from the training, and then execute it again the next day or the next week or the next month, that's really where you get the secret sauce, really, is within consistency, right? So consistency requires a lot of training and recovery. And so to answer your question and go back to answer your question, the for pre, during, and post nutrition, and then also recovery in forms of downtime, rest time, off days, and sleep. Those are the two pillars that I always talk about with my patients. If they, most people can understand that if they're not sleeping well, their ability to recover from their workouts is poorer. Their ability to push it during their workouts is poorer because they don't have the energy for it, right? And so sleep ends up being a cornerstone of health that I dial in with every single one of my patients, let alone, patients that have performance-related goals. But there's nothing that you can do. You can't buy a supplement. You can't, put on some Normatec boosts. You can't put on a cream that's going to replicate the recovery benefits that you get from a good night's rest, right? So that's the primary thing you dial in first. And then secondarily is the nutrition piece of the pie. And nutrition's a big call. Go ahead.
Just what is sleep, and what should people be trying to hit with that before we move on to nutrition?
Yeah. So sleep for me is the goals that I typically have people go for is about 7 or more hours per night of sleep, right? And that's actually being asleep. That's not just the time that you're giving yourself in bed.
Yeah.
The window of time that you're giving yourself in bed. That's actually how much time you're asleep. So typically you assume that if you're a good sleeper, meaning that you fall asleep within 15 to 30 minutes of trying to, and you stay asleep most of the night, most of the time, then you will be getting, if you give yourself a sleep window of 7.5 to 8 hours per night, you will typically get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And so in my, the easiest thing to track is, and the most accurate thing to track with wearables and the like, is sleep duration. So I like people to focus on that first, and then sleep quality. If you are wearing a wearable like a Whoop band or an Oura ring or a Garmin device or a Suunto or a Polar device, they'll all give you a sleep quality metric score, and they vary dramatically. Meaning that I don't put a ton of stock into it, and I try my best to impart that into my patients' brains. Is that you don't wake up, look at your watch, and then decide how you feel. You wake up, you think about how do I feel today, and then you might look at your watch 20 minutes later, and then maybe that corroborates your how you feel. But those are the two things. It's just waking up feeling refreshed, feeling like you have the energy to push it during your workout, and do all of the other activities of your daily life, which includes working, childcare, and the like. And then if you're waking up feeling relatively refreshed and motivated to train, there's no better metric to say that you're sleeping enough, right? So
totally. Yeah. Love it.
Yeah, so sleep, and then exercise, or then dietary piece of the pie. Almost always the problem is actually underfueling. Is when I see in my clinic, in my patients, underfueling is way bigger problem than overfueling for my patients, because I don't know, there's a little bit of everyone wants everything all at once. They want the weight loss, they want the performance, they want the ability to recover, they want good energy. And they're actually a little bit competing. So if you want to do a weight loss cycle, I typically do that in the off season, meaning that we're not trying to train for something specific, because it will impair your ability to push it really hard during a workout and recover during after the workout. So I try to have that conversation up front. There is ways to lose weight and feel good, but you have to go very slow with the weight loss, and you have to be very intentional with the nutrition and everything else in your life. So by far, under fueling is a bigger problem that I see in my practice. And then I would say, the biggest difference between men and female is also that men can get away with a lot more, meaning that, you can get people that intermittent fast more, they eat bigger meals, like kind of binge 1 meal a day, 2 meals a day. They can kind of figure it out. whereas that's certainly not true for the females. I feel like there's a lot more intentionality that has to go into that. And of course, you can chat about that.
Yeah.
But those are the two things: sleep and making sure you're not under fueling. And then we can talk about more about the dietary piece after you give your blurb there too.
Yeah, completely agree. In terms of sleep being a huge parameter, right? Because if we can't recover, then we can't go back to the workout we need to the following day. So couldn't agree more. And then kind of the building blocks around nutrition, what differs for women than men, and a lot of the research that originally came out around timing of fueling after exercise and fueling before, actually, I shouldn't just say fueling after, but was done in a male population. And now they're finding out, now that they're doing women's studies around this, that women's adaptations are very different. And so as women, we do not do well with fasted workouts. So if your workout is going to be longer than an hour, we should have a small amount of protein, usually about 10 to 15 grams of protein and about 30 grams of carbs on board if it's a morning workout, right? If you haven't eaten anything from lunch till when you're doing a workout at 6 p.m., you may want to look at fueling before that workout too, right? Because that would be a significant amount of time without food. But we do better when we have a little bit of protein and carbohydrate on board in terms of being able to get the gains we want from our exercise, right? So if it's a longer run, you're going to be able to be more effective with your training with a longer run. If it's more weightlifting activity that you're doing, it's going to be a more efficient weight session. And then for women after exercise, we have a window of about 30 minutes to an hour after exercise where our cells and our muscle cells will pull up those good nutrients so that we can recover efficiently. Men have up to 3 hours, so way longer window that they can get fuel in. For women, it's much more structured. So usually for women, we do that kind of like small preloading snack before you go for your workout, and that can be about 30 minutes before, give you a bit of time to digest that. And then after exercise, within that 30 to 1 hour window, have a meal, right? A meal that focuses on a good amount of protein, so about 20 grams to 30 grams of protein on your plate, with a good amount of carbohydrates. So whether that's come from both whole grain, so brown rice, wild rice, those kind of things, or quinoa would be a good option. And then vegetables as well, and then a good fat source on there too, so that we're getting that complex meal with all the nutrients we need so that we can recover appropriately and kind of be ready for the next day, right? Next day of training.
Let's dig into that a little bit, because I'm sure there's people even thinking about themselves right now. They're, the whole carbs are the enemy is definitely a big, it's very popular right now, is where they're trying to minimize carbohydrate because they're associating carbohydrate with fat gain, or they're trying to do fasted workouts because they think it's going to give them some sort of an adaptation where they can burn more fat for fuel, and therefore that's what they want. A lot of people they say, I have a lot of fat that I have on board, I'd like to get rid of it. Well, wouldn't it make sense for me to not take anything in, not have any carbohydrate on board, and then just force my body to use fat? So can you just talk us through why that might be a misguided idea?
Yeah. So I would say if there was someone to read a book from, it would be Dr. Stacy Sims. She's an exercise physiologist that has done all the research around this area. But for women in a fasted state, we actually just increase our cortisol. And so we're just stressing the body much further than if we have some carbohydrates on board. Your muscles will fire more effectively, and you're not allowing yourself to get into that depleted or stressed state, which then allows for actually more fat deposit, right? Because if the body's constantly in fight or flight, then we're going to pull and hold on to more adipose tissue, because body's essentially like, I don't know what I'm going to eat next, so I need to hold on to things, right? So fasting can have almost like a reciprocal effect in a training program. There are some protocols with fasting that can be beneficial for women. It's not to say that all fasting is bad. It's just if you're training heavily and you're not able to recover from your workout, or you're just increasing your cortisol, it's more harmful than beneficial. All right, it's Dr. Stacy Sims, SIMS. I'll type that into the chat for you. Sorry, Erik. With men, do you recommend similar, like in terms of fasted workouts versus not? Because for men, it is a bit different. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's the exact same principles. The men do get away with a larger, what's called anabolic window, which is what you're talking about, where you can get the growth of the muscle, you get increased protein synthesis, essentially up to 24 hours after a weight training session. So it's like we do get a lot of grace there. So essentially, if you're eating at any point in the day, you're going to still get the amino acids in to help build muscle. So that's all that's saying. But I still would say that men would still be giving up the gains or the ability to go hard in that session, recover, and then go hard again in the next session tomorrow, right? So the ability to be consistent and feel good energy, you know, throughout the rest of your day, because most of us, you know, went professional in something other than our sport. We have to be able to perform using glucose, using blood sugar that goes to our brain all day as well. So there's the two things there. And then I also have to kind of talk to my patients about the idea that exercise is an excellent longevity tool. It's one of my favorite tools in the toolbox across the board in medicine, but it is not a great weight loss tool. So if we are doing, if somebody's coming in and they're trying to use exercise for weight loss, and that's why they're doing the fasted training and they're doing everything really depleted, then we have that conversation. We don't typically use exercise as a weight loss tool because it's not a very good weight loss tool, because the body has a million mechanisms that can counteract that underfueling during that small window of opportunity, like that 1 hour that you worked out. The other 23 hours of the day, your body will compensate so that it is not in a great deficit. Right. So once you have that discussion, okay, if we are going to be trying to lose weight, that's a different time frame of the year typically, or it's a period of time and then it's going to end and then we're going to shift into a performance goal. And oftentimes that's the best thing for most people to do, even if they're not looking for performance, they're just looking for weight loss. Everyone knows they'll hit a plateau. And that plateau is exactly when you should be transitioning anyways, to work with your body to help build an environment that your body can essentially invest in itself, invest in new bone, invest in new muscle, invest in new connective tissue, and grow and repair and be healthy again, and not be in this, what we call a catabolic or a breakdown state all the time, which is exactly what you're talking about with the cortisol, for example. So cortisol, I did want to say one thing with the cortisol, is it's normal to have some cortisol with any type of workout. And the harder the workout, the more cortisol. But part of that reason is because cortisol will help push glucose into the bloodstream. So you can imagine if you are fasted, it's very beneficial to get a spike of cortisol. You get more sugar into the bloodstream and you're still not burning fat. You're burning the carbohydrate, right? You're just burning some, you're kind of taking from Peter to pay Paul. You're taking it from the liver and you're putting it in something else. But point being is that the body is so resilient. It's so amazing. It knows what it's doing. And so you really want to structure your program to work with your body and not against it.
Yes, absolutely. Speaking of that, kind of, I think a hot topic right now as we're learning more and more about this is the different zones of training, right? So whether we're in zone 1, which is where you can have a conversation like Erik and I are having right now while you're exercising, right? You're not taxing your cardiovascular system enough that you can't speak. And then zone 2, right, where we're increasing the heart rate a little bit. Zone 3, where we're really working hard, right, all the way up to zone 5. What are your thoughts around throughout the week, if we have those performance goals, when are we trying to hit higher zones for exercise versus lower zones? What would be goals that we would want to be in lower zones for longer term, right? What's the benefit of hitting a high zone?
Yeah. A lot of questions in there. I'll just talk about structuring the week, and then you can touch on some of the zones. The zones is it. You may or may not want to get into the nuances of zones, because again, this is something that you will Google, you'll YouTube, you'll find everyone's different system, how they define it, how they measure it. And I'm just like you. I've been brought up in the school of the 5-zone model, and I love the 5-zone model. It seems to be pretty easy to explain to people and easy to abide by in your training philosophy. So I like using that model, but even if I just put that to the side, it's easy to just think about it in terms of hard days and every other day. right? So you structure your training so that you have your hard days, and a hard day just might be a long, like, walk run. It doesn't have to be an intense workout, but if that's hard for you, it's literally hard for your nervous system. You can only have so many of those in a week. Otherwise, you'll have a really sharp increase in performance, and then you will plateau forever. And that's how everyone that goes to, I would say not everyone, but this is the problem when going to like Orange Theory and F45 and Barry's fitness classes and all of these high intensity style of workouts or circuit training workouts. And if that's your primary form of exercise, you are doing a high intensity session 3, 4, 5 times a week. You're actually only benefiting from 1 or 2 of those, and you're just building fatigue for the rest of it, which is a little bit of a hot take, but it's the truth. You're gonna feel it in your bones at some point.
Yeah.
And you're just gonna quit, and you quit it altogether, and you go back to being sedentary. So I really coach my patients to just pick 2 days a week where they're going to go hard. And that could be an interval workout. It could be a Barry's fitness class to, after they're a great workout. You don't have to not go there. But if you're going to go hard, maybe on a Tuesday, and you might be going hard again on a Saturday. And in most cases, that is enough. If you are an elite level, maybe you're still doing a really hard Tuesday and a really hard Saturday, but your Tuesday might have 2 workouts, right? And your Saturday might be incredibly long with some intervals punched in there, right? But then every other workout in the week, you structure it around your life so that you have enough recovery. You have an off day if that's appropriate for you, which most people should have at least 1 off day. And then the rest of the workout would be considered in my book low intensity, meaning like you can chat, you can have a conversation, you feel good before, during, and after the workout. You feel like you could do more. You feel like you still have something in your legs and your brain and your muscles for the next day or the rest of the day, right? So if you're like me, you work out in the morning, you work all day, you run around with your kids all night, you go to bed and you're really crashed out at night. But if you went too hard during the easier day in the morning, or if I went too hard in the morning, I'm going to pay the price by petering out in the afternoon on my work day, and then having very little energy for my kids, which is obviously against my goals, right? My overall arching goals. So that's how I like to structure it, is like, think about it in terms of, what's a hard workout for you. Now space those out. You have to at least have 1 day in between, and my ideal is 2 to 3 days a week at most.
Agreed. Because otherwise you are taxing that adrenal system too, right? Every single time you do that exercise, and that can eventually lead to, you don't want to do it anymore, which we would call quote unquote burnout, right? Where the body just cannot handle that kind of intensity. And it's, again, Dr. Erik already said it, but it's not that these fitness classes are bad. It's just that we don't really want to do them every single day of the week, because they do tax the system so much, and we're actually not getting any of the benefits from it after a period of time. Okay. Moving on to other topics. With strength exercising, Erik, we've talked a little bit about, like, I think more so the cardio side around like keeping things pretty easy. With strength and building muscle, do you do the 2 days a week hard, and then you recommend more kind of functional movement for the rest of the time? How do you incorporate cardiovascular exercise into weight training? Because we don't really want to only do weight training, right? Cardio is super beneficial for improving longevity, right? And is something that we should incorporate. So would love your thoughts around that, just in terms of more like being in the gym and building muscle.
Yeah, programming, you kind of caught me here, because there's some rules that I just mentioned that don't necessarily apply in the weight room. There's some. So strength training, again, is a broad term, right? So is strength training for you, are you actually trying to get as strong as you possibly can, which is a sport called powerlifting, right? You're literally trying to lift as much weight as you possibly can, and in very specific movements. And so if somebody has a goal and they're powerlifting, it's a powerlifting related goal, or it's a strength related goal, and they have specific targets to hit, then you do still need to periodize how often you go hard, because it's a nervous system. Typically, when you are up to the limit of what your body can push, your nervous system is what actually turns the switch off. It tells you can't lift anymore. It tells you you're too fatigued to do it. It's not like the legs actually give out. It's not like the lungs don't, provide enough oxygen. It's the nervous system that protects you and then kicks in and says you can't lift anymore right now. So the nervous system ends up being the thing you need to moderate or structure around, meaning that you can't go too hard too often, that you're taxing the nervous system to the point that you're not able to actually push the high loads that you need to recover. Right. So, and to adapt. Right. So strength training is just like endurance training in the sense that you need a stimulus, you need space, recovery, and then the right macronutrients, the right micronutrients, the right environment to actually adapt. And the adaptation is where you get stronger. And then you go into the gym and you can retest that out. Right. So I'm not going to go into a huge, like strength training is actually quite broad. Like I said at the beginning, there's a great, if you're interested in pure strength, pure powerlifting, strength, even strength for life. One of the best podcasts out there is called Conjugate Nation, which is it's a fellow Canadian out of, I think, Squamish, BC. And they're an excellent podcast to listen to, all about literally maximizing the strength component to your fitness. It's very, I wouldn't say it's unidimensional, but it's very focused. And so what I see more often though, is people that have hypertrophy goals, which is just trying to gain muscle and look good, right? So the gaining muscle and looking good is actually easier in the sense that you don't need to be as, it's easier to program in the sense the only thing that really matters is volume in the week. So you can structure that volume, which just means how many reps and sets you do that target a specific muscle group, right? So if you're trying to gain muscle in your biceps, for example, you need to do a certain number of sets to near failure of whatever weight you want in that specific week. And as you progress, you will find that it's a much simpler formula. It's a much more linear process than is endurance training or strength training. So hypertrophy ends up being just getting in the volume. And that means these people can actually work out 5 days a week, and they can do largely whole body workout 5 days a week, but they would potentially split it up. You'll hear people that'll just go in and they'll just do chest, or they'll just do triceps, and they'll just do shoulders, or they'll just do legs. And that leg workout is very, they'll basically blast their calves for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and then they'll go on to the next thing. And you can do that because the next time you go and blast your calves might be, 5-6 days from now, but you've been in the gym doing other areas of the body and blasting them, over the time, the middle of the week.
Right.
So yeah, typically if people are trying to get a little bit of everything, which is all of us, let's be honest, we all want a little bit of everything. The cardiovascular training ends up being really important because it allows you to do more work in the gym. And then the strength training ends up being really important because it allows you to do more work outside the gym. Right. So if you're limited by your body breaking down at the end of a long run, strength training and muscular endurance ends up being like the ticket for you to get better.
Yeah.
And then the opposite is same true, is if you're hitting plateaus with gaining muscle or strength in the gym, oftentimes your ability to progress aerobically and get more capillarization, more blood flow essentially to the muscles, and better blood flow, better energy mechanics within each muscle, that's where you'll get the most bang for your buck. You'll go back to the gym, you'll be able to handle more loads, higher loads, and better recovery between those sets and reps.
Yeah. And yeah, I think the strength training, especially for someone like myself, who's I love cardio. All I want to do is cardio. I don't love lifting weights, but the performance that I get and the injury prevention that I get from weightlifting is what motivates me to get in there. Right. And with kind of like just overall goals, like if we can use that form of functional and broken down movements that help to strengthen certain areas and reduce our risk of osteoporosis long term, right? That's beneficial overall, right? So that then we can all be outside and be picking up grandkids, right? Or running really far, if that's what motivates you. But the strength work is incredibly important. And I think it's something that often it can get missed, right, as a key piece until you get an injury, which I'm a prime example of that, where I used to just try to run and bike only, and I just kept getting injured. And so now the niggles always come back when I stop going to the gym, and then I have to get back in there, right? And so it's just a constant reminder of that, which it's a great, something we can incorporate 2 days a week for 30 to 45 minutes, gets you a ton of time where you can do really functional movement to support your more long distance goals, if that is what you're interested in doing, right? And then on the flip side, if building muscle in the gym is important to you, like Dr. Nelson already said, doing cardio helps, right? Because it allows your performance in the gym. You can push longer, get your heart rate up easier because you're adapted to that. So they definitely play off of each other. In terms of just baseline overall recommendations for general fitness, right? This is a really broad topic. What do you recommend in terms of the amount of time you recommend people exercise for, how they incorporate weights and cardio into that?
Yeah. I say, what can you do? How much can you do? And then I basically go from there and I try to get 30 minutes more. Literally. I try to meet people where they're at because it's so hard. You read a recommendation, whether that's ACSM or it's CSEP here in Canada. The recommendations are essentially 150 minutes per week of cardiovascular training, trying to get into that zone 2 or higher, which is, moderate to vigorous physical activity. And then you add on top of that 2 dedicated strength training sessions, which is typically the recommendation as well. Now I say, in my I would say, like in reality, if you can get into the gym twice a week and it's 30 to 45 minutes, exactly what you said, that is a fantastic, I would say, base for maintaining a base amount of strength and stability and bone mineral density and muscle mass. So it's typically all that is required, I would say. And if you structure it well and you know what you're doing, or you're working with somebody that's helping you out, 2 45-minute sessions a week of strength training is excellent. If you have strength-based goals, hypertrophy-based goals, maybe even just some body composition-related goals, maybe that creeps up to the 3 or 4 in the week, and they might be a little bit longer as well. But that's obviously a trade-off with something else in your life. And I would say the cardio thing is interesting because, at least in my practice, it's the piece that people aren't doing as much. It might be opposite in your practice, but I'd say a lot of males, age 30 to 60, and they're happy to go to the gym and lift weights for an hour. Like they're happy, they'll go 3 or 4 times a week, and then they just assume they're getting all the benefits. And for general health, they're missing a huge chunk of benefits by not doing enough aerobic-based training. And so for those people, I'm trying to get into, again, for those people, I'm actually just trying to get them to do 2 days a week of aerobic based training, or at least a longer prolonged warm-ups for their strength based training, right? So they're getting some sort of a cardiovascular stimulus, or like on a weekend they get into a hobby or a sport that involves longer, slow aerobic efforts like hiking and hunting and the like. Right. So yeah, so that's, I do say, I mean, the recommendations are there for a reason. They're evidence-based. 150 minutes per week absolutely is an evidence-based. But if you look at the graphs where they get that stuff from, you get amazing benefits in the first, like going from 0 to 1, 0 to 2 workouts in a week of any type. You will go through the roof. And then it's where you start to see kind of the plateaus is where they're actually telling you to kind of, this is where you should target, because as you go from nothing to 150 minutes per week, you're a straight line curve up, right? And then it starts to plateau a little bit. Like from a health benefit perspective, it's not that much better to get another 150 minutes a week. It's still a little better, but it's not that much better. And then it's certainly not that much better to go from 300 to 450 minutes per week, right? And then there's eventually a trade-off where it becomes deleterious to long-term health, potentially, in the individual, if they're not doing the other stuff, that, like the trade-off away from some other things that might be helping them maintain a resilient body, right? So for me, I like those as aspirational goals. Try to hit them. Once you hit them, you're getting most of the medical benefit from them, and then it's really about dialing it into your why and what's the goal, what's the performance, how can we be more specific here, as opposed to just feeling like you have, you got a checklist of things to do every week. It feels like you're just getting them done and you're not necessarily feeling motivated, inspired, happy, excited to do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. In terms of longer activities, like if you're out in that zone 1 hiking on a weekend or cross-country skiing, since we're just coming out of winter, what are fueling guidelines for longer activity so that we're not digging that hole that you then have to come out of with nutrition afterwards? Like if we're training for 2 hours or more, how do you fuel throughout the workouts? How do you help your patients understand that? Because I think that's a big piece of the underfueling that I see, where people just aren't eating enough through the workout either, right? And then they're expecting their body is going to be able to recover. And then some patients that I've had before are not eating enough, but then they're also not eating a recovery meal. And so then you're just in a depleted state as you move into your next training block the next week, right? Which eventually the body is going to not be able to continue that.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to throw this back to you. You can answer this question because I want you to, because you can use yourself as an example, because you used to be terrible at fueling during workouts.
I know, I really was. Yeah.
So you could talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess I can talk about it. So I used to be really, really bad. And I mean, it's a work in progress all the time while you're doing longer distance things. But if you're going out for more than an hour and a half, you should probably be fueling through your workout. And depending on how intense it is, like if you're trying to run a half marathon as fast as you can, you should be fueling way sooner than what I would be doing in necessarily like a zone 1, zone 2 training run long term. But essentially every hour, trying to hit 30 grams of protein, if not way higher than that.
Carbohydrate.
Sorry, carbohydrate. What did I say? Protein?
Yeah.
Carbohydrate. Too many things are going through my head right now. Trying to hit a 30-gram carbohydrate. You don't really need to be fueling with protein while you're exercising, because your body is trying to use up carbohydrates. And essentially your body just has to try to break that protein down to get it to a glucose so that it can pull that up in the muscle, right? So carbohydrates are your friend when you're in these longer distance activities. But we want to kind of hit 30 all the way up to, some people are hitting 100 grams of protein now in a workout. These are like Tour de France cyclists that are trying to hit that, right?
Actually much higher now.
Really?
So there's a couple of reports where they're up to 180 grams of carbohydrate in an hour.
Wow.
Mostly cyclists, like you said, because they're sitting, they're not jumping around, and it's not just sloshing around their stomach, but it's literally they're using principles from eating competitions to train their gut so that they can eat more during their workouts, so that they can essentially keep up with the amount that they're burning, and they're dipping into their stores less.
Yeah. So I mean, with that, that takes training too. So if you're trying to push more long distance goals, you have to train how to fuel through that, because your stomach just can't handle it when you first start. I use a mixture of foods and powders so that I can try to hit my carbohydrates, and I aim for that 30 to 50 grams an hour. If I could improve that, my performance would probably be better and better, but that's like where I can seem to stomach things. And that's way better than not fueling at all, right?
To put it into perspective, 30 grams, like people think, okay, 30 grams, you're taking 30 grams of sugar, 120 calories, 120 calories or 30 grams of sugar might last your muscles 5 or 6 minutes if you're going hard. Like you go hit a hill, go up a hill for 5 or 6 minutes, you've burned 100% of that. It's gone. And so now the rest of the hour you're running, you are literally dipping into stores. And that's not an unlimited amount of carbohydrate that you can store. So it really comes down to limiting the losses. That's the whole reason why we consume calories during workout. And it's low fiber options. They have to be low fiber, they have to be low fat, they have to be low protein. Otherwise you're not going to be able to stomach enough carbohydrate, you're not going to be able to stomach enough food to actually get the benefit. Because Yeah, I mean, if you did a little bit of quick math, you could easily burn 150 grams of carbohydrates in an hour, which is the point I was making before, is that
Mm.
if you're a recreational athlete and or you're, even a sub elite athlete and you're only tolerating 60 grams, you are very much in the hole at the end of that hour. So imagine what you're like at the end of a marathon,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or the end of an ultra or the end of a bike race.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just in a place where you really will fall behind and never catch up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
totally.
whole food sources, like you mentioned, whole food sources, which are awesome if you can tolerate them, and then if you can have them on board. Like, it's sometimes a little harder to bring. But there was trials comparing literally potatoes to gels, and it was equally as effective. There's other trials you can use dates. They're just a little bit too high in fiber for prolonged events. But for short events, dates can be pretty good. Oat balls, rice balls. What are some other ones that you like to do?
Yeah, I mean, I've just recently actually made some rice balls, and they're super palatable and easy to get down. There's a great book. It's called The Feed Zone, and it kind of walks you through different food options that high performance cyclists are using for carbohydrate intake. And they have some awesome recipes. So I'll just leave that in the chat notes. But those have been kind of my go-to, because gels at the end of the day, they get pretty expensive, right? And can just be a lot to fuel with if you're doing a long training run every single week. So I try to use more things that I can make at home. And then I use gels and easy stuff when I am racing.
Yeah. The way that I would the way I do in my personal training is that I will fuel based on the intensity or the duration. So if it's a really intense workout, I always have carbohydrates on board. I usually eat something very rich in carbohydrate beforehand. I'll have something in my bottle, some sort of electrolyte and carbohydrate drink, and I usually have a gel. And even though it's not above an hour and 30 minutes, typically the intensity is so high that essentially the only fuel that I am burning to any substantial amount is carbohydrate. And if I literally have more on board, I will perform better. And most people that have experimented with this and they can get up to 60 plus grams, you'll feel significantly better, to the point where you push more power, you run faster paces, you're able to get a stimulus in that's high enough that allows your body to go and adapt to it. And then you get to another level, right? So if it's a really spiky, intense workout, I'll bring carbohydrates on board. And then if it's a long duration one, I'll bring carbohydrates on board. And then pretty much every other one, I don't think about it. I just try to eat well before and after. And I just assume that my carbohydrate stores are enough, or like my burn rate is quite low because the intensity is low. Then that also helps me, talking about how we structure the training. You're structuring the training and then you're fueling your training. So the carbohydrate intake is not to say you should have a crazy high carbohydrate intake all the time. It's really about performance and getting the most out of the workouts, because you're already, sacrificing an hour or 2 hours of your day. So you might as well get the adaptation that you're looking for from that workout.
Totally.
Right. So, and you can structure however it works for you, whether that's full like whole food diet, or you're using some sort of a engineered product, which is usually, gels and powders and the like. I would say if you're really on the pointy end of performance, you absolutely need to use the manufactured products at some point. But at the beginning, you don't need to make it too complicated. Like Ashley put in the comments, 30 grams of carbohydrates could come from 2 big dates. That's easy peasy, and it prevents you from underfueling. And at the very least, it makes you a little less depleted for your next workout, or hanging out with your kids, or just going to work.
Totally. Yeah. You mentioned really carby before you go for a workout, if it's a longer one or it's a more punchy one. What's a good option? What do you like to eat? What's your kind of base there? I mean, that can be different for a lot of people, but just some examples I think might be helpful.
Yeah. So I am a big fan of healthy diet aside from pre-workout. Because if it's a high fiber, for example, most of your healthy whole grains are going to be high fiber. Lentils, beans could be high fiber. I love high fiber. I tell my patients, and I personally try to eat 40, 50 grams a day, but it's not the workout. It's not in my meal before a workout. So I'm going to choose a low fiber predominantly refined carbohydrate type of a food. The exception is oatmeal, and that's simply because for whatever reason I can tolerate any amount of oatmeal and be totally fine. But that's things like sourdough breads. It's things like, bagels. It's things that are easy to digest and high amounts of carbohydrate. So if I'm trying to get as much carbohydrate as possibly can, it's usually a bagel with honey on it or something like that. And then I know, for example, that's going to be about 100 grams. I'll burn it in the first hour. Then I'll be still utilizing some other fuel source while I'm on the bike or I'm doing a triathlon workout or something like that. But oatmeal is my go-to simply because I tolerate it really well. And if it's a day where I'm going to work, I'm going to put all my additional high fiber sources, chia seeds, flax seeds, berries, all that kind of stuff. If I'm just about to go for a run, it's going to be pretty plain Jane oatmeal. And then maybe a little bit of berries just for the flavor, and then some maple syrup. Yeah.
Yeah. I sometimes will add in some Greek yogurt there too, palatability too. Not Greek yogurt, just the full fat yogurt. Just gives more of that kind of like sustained longer amount of fuel, which I feel good on. But again, it's kind of finding something that does work for you if you are going for a more intense workout that your GI tolerates, right? Your gastrointestinal system, so that you don't feel nausea or have the runner's trot or things like that can often happen.
And I should preface that it depends on how close you are to the workout too, right?
Totally.
Like I could pretty much eat anything 3 hours before a workout, but if it's 30 minutes or 45 minutes, you get away with less, and you got to figure that out what works for you. But it's certainly something you shouldn't ignore.
Totally. Why don't we get to some of these questions? And then if there's any other questions, you guys feel free to drop them in the chat. And then we can kind of go through them as we can here. Now, with this, Princess Fanny, nice to see you. I'm not sure what you mean by capoeira is your weekly go-to, and then rotate with outdoor. Dr. Nelson, do you know what capoeira is?
No, let's get some more context there. So if you can add it in there,
Yeah, we'll let Fanny add that in, and then why don't we go to Ashley's question here. I struggle with getting enough protein, especially at breakfast, because I can't eat eggs. What tips/tricks do you have for effective, convenient ways to get in more protein throughout the day? Great question. So, if you can take in, if you like protein powders, those are a really easy option because a scoop of them gets you 20 grams. And as long as it's a clean protein powder that doesn't have a ton of additives and things that we don't necessarily want in there, and your GI system tolerates it okay, then that's great. With other options, a Greek yogurt does have a fair amount of protein, and if you're having that with something like steel cut oats, and then you're adding a nut butter or walnuts or pumpkin seeds on top, you're going to hit your 20 grams of protein pretty quick in there. It is something that you could pop into just like a MyFitnessPal or Chronometer, just so that you can look at the grams and see, are you hitting that 20 gram protein that you want? And then if not, just add in other things that might get you there. Any other things that you like for protein, Erik? Meats are an option if you do eat meat. It's not our common necessarily breakfast food, but some people will have like a chicken breast or a meatball or something like that for breakfast if that's palatable to you in the morning.
Yeah, I'll say first things first is try to figure out what your actual protein target is, right? Because you're just going to hear everywhere you look, you should get more and more and more and more protein. But there's a limit to that. Where you get majority of the benefits is somewhere between 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight up to maybe 2 grams per kilogram of body weight in very specific circumstances. But if you just try to hit that floor of 1.2 to maybe 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, you're going to be getting the vast majority of the benefits out of the protein that you're getting, regardless of source, plant-based or not. So that's the first thing, is trying to figure out exactly where you're at. And if you know you're consistently low, Then I also love protein shakes. I eat things like Good Protein, which is a good example of a clean source. It's got the high amounts of fiber as well, which I prefer. But if you can tolerate whey, you can tolerate some other. There's some ones that you might have to look into if you're really, really sensitive to protein powders. But Greek yogurt's typically quite high. If you, I like to, when I'm doing things like rice, is I'll do a 50-50 blend with lentils, so I get some more protein in from there. So I'm getting my whole grains, but I'm also getting more lentil or more protein. And then, typically seafood, very high in protein. Lean meats, very high in protein. Breakfast is a little bit challenging, and this is where I like the nuts and seeds and adding into a steel cut oatmeal bowl, for example. And then having, what I typically do is I put just a little bit of protein powder into my oatmeal to make it just whatever flavor it is. Maybe it's chocolate flavor or what have you, but I might add another 6, 7, 8 grams of protein, and it doesn't change really how I feel. But in terms of like the breakfast, in terms of how many calories I'm getting, it's really close.
Cool. Ashley, I see that you've raised your hand. I'm not entirely sure what to do with this, but if you want to take your off mic and ask us a question, go for it.
Yeah, thanks. That helps a lot with like the clean protein powder, like you said, and the lentils. Lentils for sure. I get, like you totally hit on it, that if you have to have like meat for breakfast, that's not usually like the first thing that you think about. But what about tofu and like tempeh? Like, do you think that it's like we shouldn't eat too much tempeh or tofu to get the protein, or do you think it's safe and it's okay?
Great question. Organic non-GMO tofu is a better option than just a generic tofu. If you're having it 2 to 3 times a week, I think that's fine. If you were having it every single day, then that's maybe not beneficial. We kind of want to like switch up our different protein sources most of the time, or be eating a variety of different types of protein. That's better for your gut microbiome and so many other things that we haven't really touched on today at all. But I think tofu here and there is totally fine and is a good source of protein that can pack a punch, right? And is easy for people. I think if you're going to do tofu, then maybe don't choose a soy protein powder if that was a protein powder option, and that way you're just diversifying your protein as well.
Yeah. I have a little bit of a different take on this. So I have no problems with you taking in tempeh or tofu pretty much daily, because there's plenty of cultures around the world that actually do have soy products every single day. And it up to about 3 servings a day doesn't seem to have any deleterious effect in terms of like hormone health, for example. In fact, it probably reduces your risk of breast cancer, probably reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease, probably reduces the risk of prostate cancer in men. So there's just generally, aside from like, I totally agree in terms of the quality of it. If it's there is a problem with heavy metals. If you're having a high amounts of soy, there's a problem with contamination with specific pesticides that they use. So if it's an organic form and you trust the source, then you're happy with that, and you tolerate it well, I think that's definitely an option. Another option would be like a bean burrito. If you tolerate like a black bean burrito or a quesadilla or something in the morning, it's actually a pretty common, breakfast food that I would eat around this house, and it's a fairly high protein as well too. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Martial arts, just to kind of go back to that question there. Martial arts, there's so many different types of martial arts. So I consider martial arts, depending on how intense you're going, because obviously it depends on if you're really early in the process, you're just learning the sport. But generally speaking, it's a fairly intense session, and it's very, very intense on your nervous system. And so if you're doing that every day, that would be a problem in most circumstances. But if you're doing that twice a week, I think that's perfect. And then you add that into some other strength, stability, spine workout that you're doing based on YouTube. I think that's excellent. 2-3 times a week. Just think about it in terms of not going too hard too often, but going really hard when you can go hard. And then you're going to get the bang for your buck. You're going to feel like you have energy left over. You're going to feel like you can go into the next workout really, really motivated and happy and excited. And you're going to be excited about the next thing you have on your list, right? Your next goal.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. And I think in combination with outdoor activity, that's great. Fanny, that all sounds really positive, and a good way to to move your body. And if you're recovering well and feeling ready to go for the next day, like Dr. Erik said, then that's a great form of movement moving forward. Are there any other questions? Does anybody else want to pop something in the chat or take their microphone off mute? And we can answer any last questions here for tonight.
As some people, if you're putting in a question there, great, we'll answer that for sure. We didn't talk at all about supplements or, a lot of the I would say like the sexy recovery tools and the things that people use to optimize their performance, right? And there's a million things you'll go read online. Majority of them do not work, but there's a handful of supplements that absolutely do help. And I just want to throw in there, you should do some research on creatine. Creatine is definitely one of those. Certainly well tolerated. It works in far more people than just the gym bros and the meatheads. Most people, including endurance trained athletes, will benefit from creatine. So just talk to your doctor about creatine. Fish oil is another one of those ones that often is utilized in the recovery space because it just helps the normal recovery, the normal resolution of inflammation, which is obviously a big piece for athletes.
Totally. And just a mention for creatine for women who are in perimenopause, menopause, awesome for ability to build muscle in the gym as we're working to prevent osteoporosis as well as helping with cognition too. So yeah, talk to your doctor about creatine and if it's the right fit for you moving forward.
Yeah.
Robert, you've raised a hand.
I did. So as one of the runners on the group, I'm 100% plant-based, and some are the breakfasts that I have. I do a month, everybody's probably heard of the Just Egg replacement meal. So you can make it simple, easy with mung beans that are soaked overnight and then blended with some turmeric and some dehydrated onion, and that'll last for like 3-4 days. So I do a mung bean omelet, and I also do a tofu scramble. So
that's a good one.
Yeah. So there's a lot of good ones. And I really don't I'm not concerned with my protein intake as a runner. Everything that you eat has protein. There's more protein on a calorie by calorie basis in broccoli than there is steak. Obviously not on weight, but as in per calorie. So as long as I'm eating, I've already got home from my run, I've showered, I listened to the whole thing, I didn't skip a beat. And I've got this huge meal and it's just veggies and, some meatless sausages. And so I'm really not concerned about, as long as I'm eating enough, I know I'm getting enough protein. So.
Yeah, and this is where tracking comes in. We Dr. Smith already mentioned it, but we like to use a program called Chronometer where you can literally just throw in whatever you're eating. It's the diet tracker, and you can very clearly see where you're coming out and whether or not you have you have some areas to improve, because some people might think they have areas to improve and it's not the case. They're doing a great job, and vice versa. So it's really about being honest about where you're at and what you're averaging in intake, and then seeing if you need to optimize in some form or fashion. And that's oftentimes where we will start, even as naturopathic doctors, when we're working with our patients, is we're just getting an assessment where you're at, and then we're combining that typically with your lab work, and then we can come up with a strategy to correct some deficiencies, improve things, optimize in some fashion. Yeah. The 0.7 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight is actually quite similar to the ranges I was giving in per kg. But the issue here too is that most of these, based on scientific, most of the scientific papers that look into this actually use not just overall body weight, they use either ideal body weight or lean mass. So meaning that the 1.6 gram per kg is actually not like your overall body weight. It's taking your everything except for your fat, right? So if you have 30 pounds fat, the rest of you, that's what they calculate that on. So it's actually lower than what the lay culture will use, right? The Gen Pop culture uses in their calculations. But, rough estimate 1.2 to 1.6, I think, is a really good starting point. And if you are struggling for whatever other reason and your doctor's advising you to eat more, then sure, you can go above that, but you shouldn't just assume you're low and then continue to add more and more and more and more and more and more, because you just displace other stuff, right?
Totally.
And to answer the strength training versus the cardio piece, it's actually, we used to think there was a huge difference, but there's not. There's really not a huge difference between these. So if you're a cardio athlete or you're aerobic based training, it's very similar in terms of the optimization. It's 1.2 to 1.6. The strength training, if you're on the really tippity top point of your sport and you're trying to gain as much lean mass as you possibly can, and bodybuilders, for example, you typically are above 2 grams per kilogram, and that's true. It will help, but it's like, you know, is the juice worth the squeeze at that point for most people, right? And it's honestly impossible for most people without supplementing constantly, right? So it's a realistic expectation of what you can hold over a lifetime, as opposed to, you know, what you can handle for 2 weeks and just suck down another, you know, chicken and broccoli and rice.
Yeah.
But
yeah, sorry, go ahead, Erik.
Well, I was just going to thank people for coming. I know we already kept them a bit beyond the 8 p.m. But thank you very much for joining us on this chat. We love talking about this kind of stuff. Obviously, you can find us at Neurvana Naturopathic Medicine. We're in Mission and in Calgary. And then obviously Community Natural Foods, big thanks to them for hosting this. And you know where to find their 2 locations in the city as well.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, everybody. Hope you have a great night.